Welcome to Sleepless Horror, where ghost stories are whispered by candlelight. Wherever you're watching from tonight, what time is it for you right now? Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders fall. Settle beneath your blanket. We'll be here a while. Tonight's tale takes us to a town most maps have forgotten. A place called Greymoor, nestled between hills that never seem to dry and woods that always feel one step too quiet. It's a town of shuttered windows, crooked chimneys, and signs that swing even when there's no wind. At the heart of Greymoor, pressed between ivy-wrapped stone walls and gas lamps long burned out, stands a building few remember to notice, the Greymoor Athenaeum. Once a proud library with high spires and carved oak doors, the Athenaeum has been closed for more than 70 years. Its windows are clouded with time, its floors grown with age, and its shelves, they say, are still full. Not of readers, but of books that hum when no one is listening. Books no one remembers writing. Books that add new pages on their own. It is here, on the edge of winter and the edge of something stranger, that a man named Lucien Merrick arrives. He carries a small suitcase, a worn coat, and a letter he isn't sure how to explain. A job offer, perhaps, or a warning, written in long, looping ink with no return address. The letter reads, "To whom it may concern, the position of caretaker is yours, should you wish it. The library is patient, but it is not always kind. Light the lanterns. Do not move the books, and never read aloud what is not written by hand. There is no signature." Lucien folds the letter into his pocket and lifts his gaze to the Athenaeum. Its door creaks open, not because someone opens it, but because it has been waiting. Behind it, the dust waits too, and silence, and shelves that stretch farther than they should. Somewhere in the stillness, a page turns on its own. Welcome to Greymoor, and welcome to the book that wrote itself. The caretaker's quarters were tucked behind the old reference room, past a locked iron gate, and beneath a hanging sign that simply read, "Staff." Lucien let the door swing open with a tired sigh, his lantern casting a golden pool of light onto the dust-veiled floorboard. The room was small but warm, shaped like a keyhole and furnished with the kind of pieces time forgets. A narrow bed with a handmade quilt, a writing desk facing a slatted window, and a stone fireplace blackened by decades of quiet ash. On his first night, Lucien unpacked only the essentials: a worn notebook, a fountain pen, a single book of poems, and a photograph of a place he no longer visited in dreams. Outside, the fog hugged the windows, soft and pale like breath against glass. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled midnight, though Greymoor's church had long since collapsed. Lucien stood for a moment, letting the silence settle around him like a shawl. He struck a match and lit the lantern by the door, then the one in the west hallway, just as the rules had said. "Never let the west wing darken," the instructions warned, handwritten in careful script beside the key rack. "Leave the light burning, even if you don't see why." He did so without question. The library was a different creature at night. By daylight, though no one visited, it felt still, if a little sad. But at night, the silence deepened into something watchful, not unfriendly, but aware. Lucien found himself speaking in whispers, even to himself. He made his rounds slowly, the way one might wander through an old cathedral. His footsteps echoed softly over the checkered floor as he passed row after row of sleeping bookshelves, each spine bowed with age and use. Some shelves curved slightly toward the center of the room like listeners. Others seemed to tilt away, as if guarding something private. In the central reading room, he paused. The domed ceiling above bore a mural he hadn't noticed before. Faint and flaking, but still visible in the flicker of his lantern. It showed a circle of people gathered around a single open book, their eyes wide, hands clasped, mouths parted in awe, or perhaps fear. In the book, the painted letters twisted in an alphabet he did not recognize. A soft thump broke the quiet. Lucien turned, heart steady but attentive. He was alone. He followed the sound to the north wing, a narrow corridor lined with oak-paneled shelves and deep, wall-set alcoves for private reading. There, on a low table beneath a dusty window, sat a book he hadn't seen before. It was open. Lucien stepped closer, cautious but not afraid. The pages were blank. He reached out, fingertip grazing the edge of the paper, and then, without sound, a single word appeared on the page in fresh, dark ink. Watcher. Lucien drew back. He waited. The air held still. And then, slowly, the ink spread again, letter by letter, as if written by an invisible hand. You are not the first. He stared at the words for a long time, the lantern in his hand burning quietly. Behind him, the shelves made no sound. The next morning, Lucien awoke to the hush of snow, not heavy, but enough to soften the outline of the world. Outside the narrow window, the courtyard of the Athenaeum was hushed beneath a pale dusting. The black iron gate wore frost like lace. He rose slowly, brushing sleep from his eyes, and dressed with a thick sweater and scarf. Though the fireplaces were lit nightly, the chill never fully left the library's bones. Downstairs, the shelves sat unchanged, books resting in their places like sleeping cats, unmoved and unbothered. But Lucien's attention turned again to the table in the north wing, the one where the book had written to him. When he returned to it, the book was gone. The table was bare, except for a faint ring of dust where its edges had rested. Lucien glanced around, unsure whether he felt relieved or unsettled. Had he imagined it? Sleep played strange tricks in this place, and the silence was the sort that stirred its own shadows. He resumed his routine, polishing brass lanterns, brushing shelves, checking for leaks in the long-forgotten corners of the west wing. But something had shifted. Around midday, he discovered a small doorway he hadn't noticed before. It was tucked behind a loose curtain near the stairwell. Not hidden exactly, but easy to miss. Above it hung a sign painted in faded gilt. Writing room. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was warmer, as if a fire had burned there not long ago. Dust hung in golden threads in the sunlight pouring through a high, round window. The walls were lined not with books, but with desks, narrow writing tables, each with its own candle holder and quill. At the far end sat a lectern. Upon it, an open book. Lucien stepped closer. His footfalls felt strangely loud here. The book was not like the others. This one bound in dark green cloth, its pages crisp and white. He turned them carefully. Each was filled with handwriting. Dozens of different scripts, some looped and ornate, others sharp and narrow. Some were titled, others were signed. But all bore the same date, the day before the Athenaeum closed, 70 years ago. The final page was blank. At the bottom, a space marked, Next Author. Lucien blinked. A pen lay beside the book. The candle in the holder had burned low, recently, as if someone had been here. And as he watched, the pen moved slightly, only a twitch, perhaps, from settling ink, but enough to remind him that silence does not always mean emptiness. Lucian backed away gently, careful not to disturb the air. And behind him, though he dared not look, he thought he heard the faint sound of a page being turned. Not from fear, not quite, but from a quiet hum of restlessness, like a violin string drawn faintly taut, the kind that presses at the edge of thought, too subtle to name, too steady to ignore. The wind outside shifted in long sighs, brushing against the windows like something lost, looking in. From his bed, Lucian could see the spines of books lining the shelf above the desk, their faded letters casting soft shadows in the lantern light. He rose sometime after 2 and made tea in the caretaker's kitchen, letting the warm scent of chamomile and old wood settle around him. By 3, he was walking the halls again. The library at night was different, not darker exactly. The lanterns cast steady pools of amber light, but quieter in a way that made the silence feel lived in, as though the walls remembered. His feet took him without decision back to the writing room. He paused before entering, one hand on the lintel, the other holding his lantern aloft. The room looked unchanged. Desks in neat rows, a faint layer of dust rising like mist on the floorboards. The lectern at the far end still bore the green book, open to its final blank page. But this time, Lucian noticed something new. Along the back wall stood a narrow cabinet, low and locked, its wood grained with age. Carved along its edge, nearly invisible, were a series of names. Hand-etched, uneven, faint. He knelt to look closer. There were 13 names in total. First names only, no dates, each separated by a delicate, hand-drawn line. The last one was his. Lucian. His breath caught, not sharply, but like a lantern guttering against a sudden draft. He hadn't written it. And yet there it was, scratched lightly into the wood as if by someone unsure whether to finish the curve of the final N. He rose slowly, heart steady but unsure. He walked back to the lectern and looked down at the open page again. It was no longer blank. New lines of handwriting had appeared, the same brown-black ink as before, slanted gently across the page. It read, "Lucian walks the halls. Lucian sees the names. Lucian understands the shape of silence." And below it, in smaller script, "One by one, they remember. One by one, they write. Until the book remembers itself." Lucian looked around. The room remained still. No breath but his own. No footsteps but those behind him in the dust. Yet when he turned, those footprints were gone. And the cabinet door, the one that had been locked, now stood slightly ajar. The cabinet door creaked open no wider than a breath, as if hesitant to reveal what lay behind it. Lucian crouched again, this time slower, lantern in hand, letting the warm glow spill softly into the hollow space beneath. Inside, there was no dust. Instead, the cabinet was lined with velvet the color of dried lavender, soft and unmarked. Nestled within it, arranged in a careful arc, lay 13 fountain pens, each one unique. Brass, bone, silver, glass, wood polished smooth by decades of fingers, all capped, all waiting. Lucian reached in, fingertips grazing the nearest. Its body was of tarnished silver, filigreed with curling designs that resembled smoke or script. The moment he touched it, a sound met his ears. Faint, like the rustle of paper in another room, or the whisper of someone reading aloud, just out of sight. He did not take the pen. Instead, he backed away gently, closing the cabinet without a latch. On his way out of the writing room, he turned the pages of the green book again. The words had changed once more. The tools remain. The writers are chosen. One by one, the library remembers. He whispered the final line aloud, almost without meaning to. As he spoke it, the flame of his lantern dimmed, not extinguished, but softened, as though bowing its head. Back in the caretaker's quarters, he made note of what he'd seen in his own notebook. But when he returned the next morning to reread it, the entry was gone. His handwriting had been replaced by another line, written in the same ink as the books. It said, "Lucian will not forget. We will remember for him." He stared at the page for a long time, then closed the notebook. The Athenaeum seemed quieter that day. The halls longer, the shelves slightly taller, as if stretching upward into a darkness he couldn't quite measure. He spent the morning in the map room, restoring old charts and yellowed atlases. No strange noises. No flickering lights, but twice. When he looked up, the door stood just slightly more open than before. And once, someone had set a single pen on his desk. Not his own, and not one of the 13. That night, when he lit the lantern in the west wing, it was already burning. He stood for a long time beside it, watching the soft flame curl toward the ceiling. Somewhere above, between the rafters and the roof, a page turned on its own. And outside, snow began to fall again. Slow, soft, steady, like ash from a story still being written. The mirror above the caretaker's desk had not been cleaned since Lucian arrived. Its surface was veiled in a fog of age. Not dirty, exactly, but dulled, as if the glass had learned to forget its own reflections. That morning, as he wiped it with a soft cloth and warm water, he noticed something curious. No matter how much he polished, the center of the mirror remained clouded, a soft swirl like breath on cold glass, faintly shaped like a figure standing too far to recognize. He leaned closer. The figure didn't move, but it was there, just a shadow, just a shape. And when he blinked, it was gone. Lucian didn't mention it aloud. He simply covered the mirror with a spare scarf and turned it to face the wall. The Athenaeum, as always, greeted him with silence. He resumed his rounds. West wing, south stair, the conservatory with its roof long lost to ivy. He catalogued a box of donated books that had been waiting, unopened, for decades. Each one bore a nameplate with a date and a title, but some were blank. No name, no author, just a spine and pages, waiting. One of the books, slim, navy-bound, its corners frayed, seemed to hum faintly when he lifted it. Not a sound, exactly. More a sense, like something listening from inside. He set it on a shelf behind the reference desk and made a note in the ledger. Unlabeled volume, navy cloth. Possible anomaly. Do not discard. That night he returned to the caretaker's quarters late. He prepared tea, lit the desk lantern, and removed the scarf from the mirror out of habit. The mirror was clear. Perfectly clear. But it did not show the room behind him. It showed the writing room. Empty, lit by candlelight. And in the far corner, the green book, still open, still waiting. Lucian stepped aside. The image did not shift. It held like a picture locked in place. Then, soft as breath, a figure entered the frame. No face, no clear features, only the shape of someone standing by the lectern. They lifted a pen. They wrote something on the page, and as they did, Lucien felt a cold draft touch the back of his neck. He turned. The room behind him was empty, but the mirror now showed his own reflection again, and in it, over his shoulder, a page turning on its own. It began as a quiet tap, not loud, not urgent, just present, like a single raindrop falling indoors. Lucien was in the index room, logging spine numbers from the poetry section into the register. The ink was drying slowly on the page, curling at the edges from the damp in the air. He dipped his pen again, carefully avoiding the corner of the desk where water had once stained the oak dark. Tap. It came again. He looked up. The index room was small. 4 walls, 6 tall cabinets, and a single stained glass window that hadn't opened in years. There was no wind, no clock, and yet the sound persisted. Tap, tap. It was coming from beneath the floorboards. He stood, lantern in hand, and listened. Silence. Then, a creak, the slow bend of wood under weight. Not footsteps, exactly, but movement. Lucien followed it to the corner where the cabinets met the east wall. There, half hidden behind a stack of bound archives, he discovered a narrow metal hatch set flush to the floor. No handle, no lock, just a seam in the wood, barely noticeable. He ran his fingers along the edge. Cold metal met skin. For a moment, he hesitated. Then the tapping stopped. He waited. Nothing. The hatch would not open. He didn't try to force it. He simply backed away and made a note in his small leather journal. Index room, hidden floor hatch, possible passage. That evening he brought his tea to the writing room. The green book was closed when he arrived. He didn't touch it, but a slip of paper lay atop it. A thin, folded note, browned at the edges and sealed with a wax emblem he didn't recognize. A circle of thorns. Lucien unfolded it. There were only 5 words, written in that same curling ink. The door only opens down. No name. No signature. He turned the paper over. Blank. Outside, the snow had returned, slow and steady. And inside, somewhere in the deep hush of the library, the floorboards creaked once more, as if someone below had just taken another step. It was just after dusk when Lucien found the missing page. He hadn't gone looking for it. He was dusting the shelves in the west wing, moving slowly with a soft, bristled brush and a cloth scented faintly with lavender oil. The volumes here hadn't been touched in decades. Brittle leather covers, embossed gold letters dulled by time. Most had call numbers etched into tiny brass plaques, their metal greened with age. Then, between 2 thick tomes of local folklore, he found a loose sheet tucked sideways into the shelf. It wasn't yellowed like the others, nor did it seem dusty. The edges were crisp, the ink still sharp, as though someone had placed it there just moments ago. Lucien lifted it carefully. There was no title, no name, no numbering. Just a few lines, centered on the page, written in the same looping script that had followed him since the first night. If you have found this, you are already part of it. There is no title, because there is no end. Keep reading, even when you shouldn't. Lucien held the page in his hand for a long time. The lantern beside him flickered. Not from draught, but as though the flame itself had flinched. He placed the sheet gently into his notebook, tucked between blank pages, and returned to his rounds. That night, he lit the lanterns as always. The west wing, the second floor, the main stairwell, each flickered into life with obedient quiet. When he passed the mirror in the caretaker's quarters, it remained veiled, scarf still drawn over its face. But as he turned away, he saw movement in the reflection on the glass of the window beside it. Something pale, upright, gone as soon as it appeared. He paused, then continued down the hall toward the writing room. The green book was open again, but not to the blank page. This time it was somewhere in the middle, to a passage halfway down, already written in careful ink. Lucian leaned in to read. He finds the page. He hides it. He does not yet know that it too sees him. Lucian stepped back. He checked his notebook. The loose sheet was still there, but something about the ink looked different. Wet. He closed the book. In the silence, a sound echoed faintly, a soft rustle, like pages turning in a room with no one inside. Or perhaps not quite no one. There was a shelf near the southern staircase Lucian hadn't noticed before. He had walked by it dozens of times, past the faded portraits, the brass lantern sconces, the crooked grandfather clock that never chimed, and yet the shelf had somehow escaped his notice. It was short, maybe chest high, and set into the stonework itself. Not freestanding, not decorative, built to belong. It held exactly 12 books, each bound in different material, deep crimson cloth, forest green leather, weathered parchment the color of old teeth. Each had a name on its spine. No titles, just names. He read them silently. Clara, J. Elwyn, Sister Margot, A. M. Finch, Gregor, N. Bellamy, Esther, Old Wren, Madame Ruth, Elias, T. Winter, and the 12th was blank. Lucian reached toward it. His fingertips brushed the spine, and at once a warmth spread into his palm. Not heat, not cold. A presence, like a memory pressing softly into his skin. He pulled the book gently from the shelf. It was heavier than expected. Inside, the pages were filled with neat handwriting. Story after story, each signed T. Winter in the bottom right corner. The first few were normal enough. Fables, local legends, a journal entry perhaps. But as he turned further in, the tone shifted. The stories began referring to the library, to the writing room, to a boy who became the page, to a girl who remembered her name only once it was written. The final story ended abruptly. It trailed off in the middle of a sentence. And as she turned the final page, her reflection. The ink stopped, the page blank below. Lucian looked up. The other books sat unmoving, their names clear in the lantern light. He returned T. Winter's book to its place, and only then did he notice. A 13th slot had been carved beside it, empty, waiting. Lucian touched it once, then stepped back. The hallway behind him felt longer now, as though stretched by memory, as though someone else had just walked it moments before. The grandfather clock ticked once, and then not again. Snow fell heavier that evening. From the high-arched windows of the Athenaeum, Lucian could barely see the gate, just the soft blur of flurries against the iron fence, and the faint suggestion of trees bowed under winter's hush. Inside, the lamps burned steady. The fire in the caretaker's quarters crackled without protest. Everything appeared still, and yet Lucian could not keep his thoughts from the 13th slot on the author's shelf. That empty space. Waiting. It stayed with him as he lit the lanterns, as he cleaned the north hallway, as he polished the brass plaque above the old catalogue drawer that simply read, "Special Collections." He opened the drawer without meaning to. Inside, where file cards once lived, there now sat a single glass bottle, round, stoppered, containing no liquid, only ink, but not like any ink Lucian had seen. It shimmered faintly, not with light, but with memory. It looked black at first glance, but when held closer to the lantern, he saw swirls of violet, of green, even a breath of silver. It felt alive. He closed the drawer carefully. Back in the writing room, he found the green book once again open. Only this time it was not the same book. This one was blank. No signature, no title page. Just one line scrawled across the first leaf. Do not write what you know. Write what remembers you. Lucian did not pick up the pen. Instead, he returned to his quarters, pulled his own notebook from the drawer, and began to write. But the pen hesitated. Each time he touched ink to paper, a different line appeared. Not the one he intended. Not his words. Words like, "The ink chooses, the story remembers." It was always writing you. Lucian stopped. He looked to the window. There, in the glass, a faint reflection hovered. Not his face, but a shadow shaped like him, standing still, hands resting gently on the desk. No breath fogged the pane, and when he blinked, the reflection remained, until the candle flickered, and it was gone. He closed the notebook. The pen was dry, but the words had already appeared on the next page. Lucian had never seen anyone else in the Athenaeum. That was part of the agreement. The library was long since closed, its halls left to time and weather. He was its only occupant now, caretaker, night watch, keeper of the quiet. But that night, something shifted. It was just past midnight when he passed the great reading room, the vaulted chamber with green-shaded lamps and long wooden tables. He always paused here, if only to glance inside. The room had a certain stillness to it, the kind that lingers after years of thoughtful silence. But this time, one of the lamps was lit, not flickering, not recently ignited, steady, warm. Beside it, at the far end of the room, sat a figure. Lucian froze. The person, seated, hunched slightly, wore a dark coat and a scarf tucked neatly beneath the chin. Their head was bowed over an open book. No motion, no sound, as still as sculpture. Lucian raised his lantern. "Hello," he called softly. No answer. He stepped inside. His boots made no sound on the long carpet that stretched the center aisle. The shadows of the high windows fell across the tables in long stripes. The figure did not move. He reached the end of the room only to find nothing. The chair was empty. The book lay closed, and the lamp was no longer lit. Lucian turned slowly. The room stretched silent behind him. On the chair's cushion, pressed into the fabric, was the faint imprint of weight. Someone had been there. He looked to the book. Small, dark brown leather, no visible title. He opened it gently. Inside, the pages were blank, but as he held it, ink began to appear. Not in straight lines, but in spirals. Circles of text forming outward from the center of the page, looping like a fingerprint. words that were not his, in a language he couldn't quite understand. And in the margins, one word in English, librarian. He closed the book carefully. Back in his quarters, he found a slip of parchment under his pillow. It read, "She watches in the quiet. She waits in the light. When the book is full, she will read it aloud." Lucian sat before the sealed envelope on the desk in the library beneath the library. The wax seal was still unbroken, smooth, dark gray, pressed with the same circle of thorns he had seen before. It felt oddly warm beneath his fingertips, like a living thing holding its breath. He lifted the envelope. The moment he did, the pen beside it rolled gently across the desk, though the surface was level. It stopped just short of the edge, as if unsure whether to fall or stay. Lucian opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of thin, fibrous paper, soft as vellum, heavier than parchment. The handwriting was delicate, precise, and slightly slanted. The ink shimmered faintly in the lantern light. It read, "To the one who listens. This is not your story, but it needs your hands. The ones who wrote before you have gone quiet. Their books are closed. Yours is still unwritten. And so we remember you. Write carefully. The library watches." There was no signature, no return address. But as Lucian turned the letter over, another line appeared. Not written, but forming slowly across the paper like mist tracing old trails. "We gave you the pen long ago." He looked down. The fountain pen, silver and bone, now sat upright in its holder. He had never touched it, but it had followed him, left on desks, on stair rails, beside his teacup, as though returning each time he tried to forget it. Lucian held the pen. It was light, balanced, familiar in a way that unsettled him more than comforted. He opened one of the blank books from the shelf, the one marked with tomorrow's date. Its first page had no heading, no title, but a soft grey line waited near the top as if inviting him. Lucian leaned forward, and then he heard it. Not a voice, not exactly, but a sound like breath-forming words in the back of the throat. Not spoken, remembered. He pressed the nib gently to the page, and without effort, without thought, the first line appeared. Chapter 1, though he hadn't written it. He closed the book, and in the silence that followed, the soft shuffle of another page turning somewhere in the dark below was all he heard. Lucian woke before dawn with ink on his hands. Not much, just a stain across his right thumb and the side of his palm. Black at first glance, but when he held it closer to the lantern light, it shimmered faintly violet and green. He hadn't written anything. He was sure of it. His notebook sat where he'd left it, closed and undisturbed. The pen rested neatly on the desk. The book from the hidden library, the one with tomorrow's date, was still shut tight beneath his scarf. Still, the ink was there, and beneath his nails, faint lines of darkness clung like he'd been tracing words in his sleep. Lucian washed his hands carefully. The ink didn't smudge or spread. It simply faded, as if it had never been there. But when he looked into the mirror above the sink, something had changed. His reflection blinked out of rhythm with his own eyes. Just once. A half-second delay. Enough to notice. He turned away quickly and lit the lanterns in the hall one by one. The quiet had teeth that morning. Not sharp, not cruel, but patient. By the time the sun crept over the frost-laced windows, Lucian was already deep in the reference archives, searching for records on the hidden level. There were few. a mention of Substack B, long since delisted. A brief memo signed only MW that read, "Unlisted material must be contained. Containment requires narrative. Narrative requires a reader." He paused at that line, scribbled it down in his notebook. Back in the caretaker's quarters, the green book, the original one, the one that had first moved on its own, now lay open again. But this time, the pages were covered edge to edge in words. Not neat ones, scratched, inked, rewritten over themselves again and again until the letters blurred into a fog of curling symbols. And in the center, a single line etched deeper than the rest. "You are the pen now." Lucian closed the book carefully. He did not write that day, but when he checked the mirror again that evening, the reflection smiled. He did not. By the end of the week, Lucian stopped trusting silence. Not because it broke, but because it listened. That morning, as he passed through the main hall on his way to the west wing, he heard the soft, unmistakable shuffle of a library drawer being opened. Not forcefully, not sudden, just the casual sound of reference. He followed it, lantern in hand, to the card catalogue, an old honey-colored cabinet of tiny drawers, once used to index the books by subject. It hadn't been touched in years. The labels had faded to yellow, and the brass handles wore the fingerprint ghosts of long-gone librarians. One drawer sat slightly open. Lucian hesitated, then pulled it gently. Inside, the cards were neat, alphabetical, aged, undisturbed, except one. It was bent slightly at the corner. Its ink was darker than the rest. The subject heading read, "Lucian." No last name. No subheading. Just his name. He pulled the card. On the reverse, where a location or call number should have been, someone had written in deep violet ink, page 314, line 7. Lucian held the card, turned it over again. Nothing changed. There was no page 314 in his journal, no book with his name on it, no index record in the ledgers. Still, he searched. By midday, he found it, tucked behind the Atlas volumes, a book so thin it looked like a misfiled pamphlet. No title on the cover, only a faded spine and a broken binding. He opened it to the designated page. The text was faint, as if written in the final moments of fading ink. He reads the line. He doesn't realize it's reading him back. He thinks he still chooses. He does not. Lucian closed the book with care. He looked back toward the catalogue drawer. Now all the drawers were open, dozens of little slips fluttering faintly in the breeze from nowhere, and each drawer had a subject heading, but not of topics, of names, dozens, hundreds, each one handwritten, some familiar, some long forgotten, and at the very bottom drawer, the last one where the Z entries should have been, was a single new card. Still damp with ink, it read, "The one who listens." Lucian didn't take it. He simply turned and walked slowly back toward the spiral staircase. The cards behind him whispered, but not in words, in memory. There was a gap in time that Lucian couldn't account for. He had gone to bed, or at least thought he had, sometime after the card catalogue incident. The clock in his quarters had read just after 11. The fire was low, the lantern dimmed, his journal untouched beside the pillow, but when he blinked again, the fire had gone out, and the clock no longer worked. Both hands pointed directly downward, as if broken, or as if caught in a moment not meant to be measured. He lit the lantern. Everything looked the same. The room untouched, the green book closed, the window slightly fogged by frost. But something was missing. The hallway outside was too quiet, not heavy with sleep, not still with peace, just absent, like a breath not taken, like sound that had decided not to arrive. Lucian walked the halls slowly. Each lantern he passed was unlit, though he remembered lighting them earlier that evening. The west corridor, once filled with the creak of aged beams, made no sound beneath his steps. Even the mirror on the landing reflected nothing at all. No flicker of light, no trace of him. He paused before it. For a moment, he reached out, but the surface did not meet his hand. It felt deeper, softer, like reaching into still water just before a ripple begins. And in that surface, just before he turned away, he saw something that should not have been. A clock. Not the one from his quarters, not the old grandfather in the east stair, but a strange, ornate piece mounted in a frame of thorns and wax. It ticked, but each tick reversed the hands, and above it, etched in faded gold, were the words, "The hour that wasn't is when it's written." Lucian blinked. The mirror was clear again, and somewhere behind him, in the deep unread parts of the library, a page turned. But this time, it sounded like something exhaling. It began with footsteps, not the echoing kind that roamed the great halls when Lucian was still adjusting to the Athenaeum's silence, not the creak of old beams or the rustle of wind among the bookshelves. These were different, measured, software, and perfectly matched to his own. He noticed it while walking past the history of folklore section, that low corridor with vaulted ceilings and angled lantern light. As he passed from shadow to flame, his footsteps landed against the stone with a quiet tap. And just behind his own, tap, tap, tap. He stopped. The echo stopped with him. He turned. No one. Just the books. Just the dark. Just the steady breath of a place that had learned not to flinch. Lucian moved again. So did the sound, not quite behind him. Beside. He made his way back toward the writing room, listening closely now. He passed the mirror in the upper stairwell, the one that had gone blank. And there, for a fraction of a second, was a second figure. Not behind him, not in front, just there, watching. Lucian didn't panic. He simply turned and descended the stairs, his hands steady, his breath even. But he did not go to the writing desk. He went instead to the author's shelf. 12 books, as before. One slot blank, one newly carved. But now, there was another. A third groove, lower than the rest, unfinished and rough at the edges. It hadn't been there yesterday. Lucian reached toward it, and from somewhere behind him, somewhere just outside the reach of the lantern light, he heard breathing. Not gasping, not whispering, just the slow, even inhale of someone who did not need to be seen. He turned quickly. No one. But the green book on his desk had opened itself again, and on the page, in the center in tidy black script, were 6 words. You saw him. He sees you. Lucian closed the book, and for the first time in weeks, he locked the door behind him. Lucian awoke with the impression of having spoken aloud. Not in a dream, not in sleep, But in a moment, just before waking, a word on his lips, a name perhaps, spoken softly into the still air of his quarters. He sat up slowly. The fire had burned down to faint orange coals. The lantern beside the bed was still lit. The green book lay closed on the desk, as it had been the night before. But on the floor, resting as neatly as if it had been placed there with care, was a single card. The kind used for cataloguing books. On one side, blank. On the other, in grey script, third name, forgotten. Third shelf, empty. Third page, waits. Lucian brought the card with him as he made his way through the Athenaeum. The morning light had not yet broken, and the snow outside had begun to fall again. Slower, softer than before. Like a memory choosing to return. He walked to the author's shelf and paused. There were now not 2, but 3 notches in the wood. 3 empty spaces. Only 9 books remained. He traced the 3rd groove with his fingers. It was colder than the others. Not with chill, but with absence. It felt unfinished. Not as if someone had stopped carving, but as if the shelf itself had not yet decided what it was meant to hold. Back in the library below, Lucian opened the book dated for tomorrow. Its first 2 pages remained blank, but the 3rd. Words had begun to appear. They were not written in the familiar looping script, but in a thin, slanted hand that looked nervous, as if the pen had trembled during each letter. He cannot read his own name. He can only write toward it. The 3rd name isn't given. It's remembered by forgetting. Lucian stared at the lines, then looked to his own journal. He flipped through pages, scanned entries, searching for patterns. Every mention of a name, his or anyone else's, was slightly smudged. Not scratched out, not erased. Just blurred, as though the ink remembered too much and chose to forget instead. He returned to the card. Still blank on the front. But now at the very bottom of the reverse side, a final line had appeared. Ask the mirror. Lucian closed the book, and for the first time in days, he descended the eastern stair, toward the mirror that had stopped showing faces. The eastern stair creaked like it always had. Polite, subtle creaks, like a house sighing in its sleep. Lucian held the lantern low as he descended, its amber glow painting ovals of light on the stone steps. The mirror waited halfway down the flight, tall, framed in tarnished silver, too old for its own reflection. For days now, it had shown nothing, but this time as he stepped in front of it, the glass was not blank. It showed him, but not quite. Lucian leaned in. His reflection did the same. A half-second too late. Its movements echoed his, but not faithfully. A moment's hesitation here, a breath that didn't match there. The eyes, though. The eyes stared directly into his. He raised a hand. The reflection raised the opposite one, and in its palm, something appeared, a slip of paper. He looked down. His hand was empty. The reflection smiled faintly. Lucian leaned closer. Words formed behind the glass, etched across the surface as if drawn in frost. You are the last name. Not the first, not the second. The last. You are the reader. Until you become the reed. The mirror darkened slightly, then flickered, like lantern light across rippling water. Lucian stepped back. At the base of the frame, something had appeared. A book, thin, bound in green cloth. nearly identical to the one on his desk. Only this one had a title, Reflections, Volume 1. He picked it up carefully. Inside, every page held a description, not of landscapes, not of history, but of moments. Tiny, ordinary moments. The exact thoughts he'd had on his morning walks, the precise turn of phrase from a letter he never sent, the way his fingertips had trembled when the pen first touched the page. Lucian ran his hand over the last line. It read, "He reads the reflection, but it's reading ahead." He closed the book. The mirror was blank again, and his reflection, when it returned, didn't blink at all. The eastern stare creaked like it always had. Polite, subtle creaks, like a house sighing in its sleep. Lucian held the lantern low as he descended, its amber glow painting ovals of light on the stone steps. The mirror waited halfway down the flight. Tall, framed in tarnished silver, too old for its own reflection. For days now, it had shown nothing, but this time as he stepped in front of it, the glass was not blank. It showed him, but not quite. Lucian leaned in. His reflection did the same, a half-second too late. Its movements echoed his, but not faithfully. A moment's hesitation here, a breath that didn't match there. The eyes, though. The eyes stared directly into his. He raised a hand. The reflection raised the opposite one, and in its palm, something appeared. A slip of paper. He looked down. His hand was empty. The reflection smiled faintly. Lucian leaned closer. Words formed behind the glass, etched across the surface as if drawn in frost. You are the last name. Not the first, not the second, the last. You are the reader. Until you become the reed. The mirror darkened slightly, then flickered, like lantern light across rippling water. Lucian stepped back. At the base of the frame, something had appeared. A book, thin, bound in green cloth, nearly identical to the one on his desk. Only this one had a title, Reflections, Volume 1. He picked it up carefully. Inside, every page held a description, not of landscapes, not of history, but of moments. Tiny, ordinary moments. The exact thoughts he'd had on his morning walks, the precise turn of phrase from a letter he never sent, the way his fingertips had trembled when the pen first touched the page. Lucian ran his hand over the last line. It read, "He reads the reflection, but it's reading ahead." He closed the book. The mirror was blank again, and his reflection, when it returned, didn't blink at all. By morning, the Athenaeum was silent again. The snow outside had deepened, but the wind had stilled. Only the soft sound of drifting frost against the high windows remained, like old paper being turned by a careful hand. Lucian sat beside the tall window in the east wing, wrapped in a grey blanket, a mug of tea cooling in his hand. The green book rested on his lap, closed now, but heavier somehow. Not in weight, but in memory. He hadn't written anything more. He didn't need to. Sometimes the last word isn't written. It's felt. Somewhere downstairs, the mirror had begun to reflect properly again. His face had returned to it quietly during the night. Older than he remembered, a little more tired, but no longer blurred. On the desk, the silver pen lay still, but the ink bottle was empty. He watched the snow drift outside. It fell in slow spirals now, no longer hurrying, no longer hiding, just drifting like breath between chapters. A low creak from the staircase behind him signaled the old beam settling, or something else, perhaps. But Lucian didn't turn around. He smiled faintly and sipped his tea. The Athenaeum would go on. Books would still open themselves, and stories, somewhere, would keep writing, even when no one watched. But for now, the pages were closed. The ink was dry, and it was time for sleep. Good night, reader, wherever you're listening from, and whatever time it may be for you. Thank you for turning the page with us. We'll see you again in the next quiet story.